Welcome to the 22nd episode of Dialogika. I'm Stephanie Takilisan.
And I'm Sweetie and Lee.
And this week we have our resident...
woke white woman.
Oh, thanks.
Token resident woke white woman, Kate Walton, back.
Hi, everyone.
So this week we're going to talk about the Women's March on Washington. And since in our conversation we talked a lot about intersectionality and white feminism, we thought it would be also beneficial to have Kate here. We're also going to talk about the Women's March as a way to explore more deeply about what it means to be an ally and how we can become better feminists.
Here's to it.
They came in their thousands. Children, men and women. Lots of women. This march was conceived as a celebration of women, and of one woman in particular, Hillary Clinton. But after the surprising American election, it quickly became a protest, and a protest against one man in particular, Donald Trump. There were huge crowds in other American cities too, in liberal bastions like Los Angeles, where they didn't vote for Trump. And in Chicago, where the turnout was so big, they had to change the route. In solidarity, they protested around the world. In London, a march that began on the doorstep of the American embassy was joined by 100,000 people, from the famous to the frail. They marched also in Paris today, and in Sydney, and in Nairobi. In Washington, the protests surpassed President Trump's inauguration crowd, a slap in the face to a man who cares about size. President Trump takes office as the most unpopular new president ever. Today's march put faces to that fact. Katty Kay, BBC News, Washington.
So last week, he who shall not be named was inaugurated as president of the United States. And in response to that, the very next day, millions of people around the world marched.
Pretty much against him and everything that he stood for.
Yeah, so basically the main movement was called the Women's March.
People have said that this is probably the biggest march
in U.S. history.
In U.S. history.
So essentially what they're protesting is, aside from Trump's whole being, is this idea that he's the candidate who has been very anti-woman in terms of his comments, sexual assault, and just general behavior that disrespects women. And this protest was not exactly to try impeach him or anything, but was rather a response to say, like, look, he's not my president and he is not a legitimate president. So this is calling the legitimacy of the fact that he was not popularly elected. Hillary Clinton was, if the US elected their presidents via popular vote, then Hillary would have won the election by over 3 or 4 million votes. You know, there's a real dissatisfaction, and the fact that he is not just any other president, there is something extremely abnormal about him being elected president, and that we shouldn't normalize him being president as something that is accepted behavior, you know.
Part of why this Women's March was such a big news item is that not only was there a big protest in America, but cities across the world, I think all of the continents even, I think somebody might have like at least held up a sign in Antarctica.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was a whole group of people, actually. There was a whole bunch of scientists standing in Antarctica, maybe 20 or 30 people all holding up signs.
So all 7 continents
Oh, cool.
participate in the Women's March.
Even in Indonesia and Jakarta and Ubud, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, Trump becoming president is a symbol of how the patriarchy is still very strong and deeply rooted.
Yeah.
And so I think part of this march is about fighting against and resisting the patriarchy.
On a policy standpoint, Trump is not that different from a lot of Republicans.
Oh yeah.
Mike Pence is not better.
And neither is Paul Ryan.
Neither is Paul Ryan. So I think part of this protest is very much against how openly he talked about sexual assault, sexual harassment. So a lot of white women and a lot of people who otherwise won't have protested showed up because of this like egregious line that was crossed.
And then
against white women.
Well, yeah, but then it didn't seem to have any effect.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It didn't have any impact.
That's like a big thing. Like, how can you have someone who said that and then
you vote for him?
Yeah, and he won, and 53% of white women voted for him.
Yeah, like the line that he crossed 3 months
there
ago.
was a line,
And multiple times.
and then he went like 100 kilometers like over the line, and then the rest of the electorate who chose him as president. I think that's who it's also against. You know?
I agree. I don't think this is purely about being against Trump or against the Republican Party or even what they stand for, but simply for the fact that so many people did vote for them that this is a protest almost against those people themselves.
Yeah.
So this is so much more like, yes, it might have started from Trump's election, but I think the fight is more than just against him.
Yeah. And the fight is more, hopefully it's more than just that one day. It's supposed to be this call to be ungovernable, and the idea that we're going to fight him and his presidency and what he stands for. A big controversy of the Women's March as well, more from like the people of color sectors, you know, how initially the Women's March on Washington, there was like a lot of jostling of power between women of color and white women who want to like take control of this.
Who's being represented, right?
Yeah. And then like there was a big New York Times article as well on this, how the women of color activists are essentially saying like, look, like we want to put on this platform, Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock, like police brutality, all issues that are just not about, you know, Trump's attitude towards women in general, but like specific things outside of what a lot of white women are comfortable talking about. And this got a big backlash, and how a lot of people felt that, you know, they were insulted, like, why can't we just have unity again and unite behind Trump? And then people of color were like, well, there are specific issues that needs to be addressed in this whole overarching thing.
So there were a couple of white women who at first wanted to attend the rally and they dropped out because of that.
Yeah, that was the big thing.
But to be fair to the organizers, they did appoint a more diverse co-chair system.
Yeah.
And they also adapted their manifesto to include that, you know, the kind of conversations we're talking about is not just cisgendered white women rights. It's about like trans issues, economic justice, racial justice. So I give them credit for that because they tried to be much more inclusive.
But it was definitely not without more prominent Black activists, you know, dropped out of the march, all because they were really just upset at this whole thing. And I guess at the center of this issue is like the need for us to talk about intersectional feminism as something that needs to be unpacked.
And I think something that we need to recognize is an essential part of being a feminist in this day and age.
So essentially, intersectional feminism is about acknowledging the differences in race, culture, class, and issues of concern for different people. And to be a feminist is to care about those differences and how to, you know, listen to people coming from that particular background on what they need and what they want, instead of prescribing for people how they should be or what they should want in life.
Well, I think taking up on Stephanie's point about acknowledging differences, I think is a key part of intersectional feminism, because criticisms of first and second wave feminism obviously was that it's white, straight, cis feminism. But at the same time, particularly talking about globally, there was this idea that we're all women, we're all the same. Yeah. Which a lot of people in developing countries in particular, particularly from the global south, were saying that, yes, that's nice and thanks for your support, but we actually have our own issues as well that you may not necessarily be able to understand from your own lived experiences, that we have something very different. And it's because of the color of our skin, it's because of our religion, it's because of our cultures. We have other issues as well. And I think, to me, that's what comes to mind when I think about intersectional feminism, that it is acknowledging differences and then working together to solve the problems relating to those differences and the different kinds of injustice that people experience.
That people coming from different backgrounds have different needs that needs to be met. I think the idea is it's going away from like a prescriptive feminism where a certain group of people, usually white upper class, determines for other people how you should be, or like what is considered feminist or what is considered freedom, right? Like
what is even considered a feminist issue for us to struggle on.
Exactly.
Like equal pay, obviously for a long time has been a key topic, same with political representation of women. But those topics are not necessarily the major topics of interest for women who are not white, straight, and cissexual.
Yeah.
And I think part of it as well is we are trying to recognize everyone's different lived experiences and backgrounds. We are also checking our own privileges when we interact with other people. Because I think part of the criticism of first and second wave feminism is that people think of this feminism with a capital F, that everybody's on the same page, nobody needs to check their privilege. We're all being oppressed in some way.
Yeah. And then, for example, this means like I need to listen to Black feminist activists or people from the trans community when they're talking about their issues and not have my judgment being what is right or what is even relevant in most conversations. And it's about, amplifying those voices when we're talking about those issues instead of like going with your preconceived notions of what things should be.
That's right. It's about hearing those concerns and then saying, okay, that's your main concern. That's great. Rather than saying, no, your main concern as a feminist should be equal pay. Yeah. When actually maybe it's police brutality or maybe it's religious oppression. Yeah. We don't know because everyone has those different lived experiences.
It's not a ranking system,
it's not
right?
A ranking system. I think it's about how everyone's concerns and needs are all equally valid and all struggles are valid regardless of where they come from. And white women issues should not, be the primary issue that should supersede other people's issues. And I think a big part of intersectional feminism is learning about your own privileges and your own preconceived notions and then trying to like change them and becoming more woke as a result of learning from other people's lived experiences. So one of the main criticisms for the Women's March is this failure to embrace intersectional feminism was to, get angry at people who were talking about their issues and then telling those people that they were derailing the conversation. And this is actually a failure of allyship.
Part of that, I think, is discussing about how do you be an ally in the intersectional sense, right?
I guess in this context, allyship means to really listen to those people from the different lived experiences, backgrounds, and then helping them amplify their voices in daily life and conversation.
I think allyship kind of began becoming a strong element in feminist and related movements when there started to be the queer straight alliances and this sort of idea, particularly in schools, that it's not just up to the queer people to explain themselves, and it was up to the straight people as well to particularly just talk to other straight people and explain why queer issues are important. I think that's where it kind of began.
That's definitely true. That's like historically, like when I first learned about allyship, it was in context of being an ally to the LGBTQ community. And I think that concept has translated very well in the intersectional feminist context because the acknowledgement of people coming from different backgrounds needs, different people of different lived experiences to help those people amplify their thoughts and experiences to people coming from the similar background to them and then explaining that in a more, I think, approachable way without having to always have the person who is having a lot of emotional labor or oppressed have to educate people about their own oppression.
The ability to talk about these issues without being emotionally burdened is a privilege. Yeah. And I think good allyship these days is about recognizing that privilege as well and using it to good use.
Yeah. We talked about this before, and I think being a good ally is also like shining the light on people who you should talk to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very active on social media, particularly on Twitter. I also do a lot of journalism and writing. So I often get contacted by journalists and academics who want to talk about women's issues or LGBT issues in Indonesia. And I'm very happy to give background information, provide links. But I think it's important that I don't take up that spotlight and always agree to give quotes, to give interviews, because it shouldn't be about me. It should be about other people in the movement, Indonesian women who are fighting for their own rights. And I think so that's very important for me to do. Whenever I get contacted, I'm happy to give that background info. And then I say, okay, now go talk to this person, go talk to this queer activist, go talk to this Indigenous woman, go talk to this person, because it's important that they are saying their own thoughts in their own voice rather than me saying it for them. That's not what I'm here to do. I need to be an ally in that, and that means giving other people the opportunity to speak.
Yeah. I think there's a fine line between being a proper ally and then like speaking over someone from that community.
And that's a really fine balance to achieve as well. Like, I know that's something I struggle with pretty much every day. And I've been accused of being colonialist and imperialist in the past, and I'm sure I have as well. Yeah. But it's really tricky to find that right element between being a good ally and supporter and not dominating the conversation and taking away from the people you are speaking on behalf of here. Obviously, I'm not Indonesian, but, you know, I've been working and living here for about 5 years, primarily on women's issues. But I think it comes down to the fact, if my feminist activists friends told me, we don't want you here, we don't think you're contributing, we'd prefer if you went back to your own country, that's the point where you'd have to be like, okay, well, I've tried my best, I've done my best to be an ally, but if my help isn't needed or wanted here, then I have to accept that. And I think that's part of what being a good ally is about also.
You know, it's not easy, because you also, as an ally, you have to educate. You can't just sit and be like, I support you as an ally.
Or white knighting.
Yeah, you can't just like, I'll stand beside you. Like, you have to participate.
You have to be active in that
and
conversation.
You're gonna encounter your own like biases and prejudices and learn horrible things about yourself.
Like you learned today.
Yeah, like
Comedian of 2008.
It was really bad, guys. I was not woke and said some unsavory things. But that's part of growth, right? That's part of being intersectional feminist, I think, is also recognizing that there's no one track and you might be lacking in certain areas, and it's your job, it's your responsibility to improve. These conversations about allyship and intersectionality, right? I'm glad we're having these conversations because of the Women's March, because I think if people have marched and people are happy and they go home and they feel satisfied and pat themselves on the back, then you haven't done the hard work.
That's another problem. Like, I think a lot of people are worried about with the Women's March, this aspect of performative feminism. Well,
unpack that a little bit.
Performative feminism is when you're just acting out for a cause, and then you're like, it's there for one day, and then you don't do anything else about it, and then you're holding all of this like contradictions, so you haven't examined your own internalized sexism, and then you're still, you know, slut-shaming other women, and you're still contradictory in so many things without actually putting forth a future effort to become a better feminist. So
you're just performing feminism.
Like it's like doing it for the selfies.
But to play the devil's advocate then, I mean, we could also say then, well, should those women just stay home?
No.
And should not come to the march? I think that's the crucial point, is that we have to say then, okay, we want you there and we want you involved, but we'd really like you to continue on with your work after this. You know, because we often have these conversations about baby feminists, quote unquote, who come seeking information and maybe are a bit misguided in some of their thinking at the time. And it's, again, you have to find this medium between educating them and sharing information with them and pushing them away. You have to find the key point between
and
that.
I think that's the point of, like, again, allyship, right?
So do you think then, with this idea, the people participate in the Women's March, right? Like, there's so many people of different kinds of backgrounds. If a person marched for a particular reason, a particular personal reason during the Women's March, they should also act as good allies to represent or at least be supportive of the other causes that are being marched for, right?
Yes.
Because I think that's part of like the thing that might be missed sometimes with the Women's March, because it's such a big thing that it becomes almost diluted. That you forget that like other people are coming forward with their own personal reasons, and that's equally valid, and you have to kind of support that as well.
People seeing the Women's March as day one of this new movement, I think that's part of it too, is because they're thinking, this is day one of it. But like, no, this is literally day 2,500,000 and whatever, you know, this has been going on for centuries. And I think that's part of the learning experience.
The reason why this is so important, I think a lot of people, you know, quote Michelle Obama saying like, when they go low, we go high. And then like, talking about this. And what that means, I think, for me, if you're only out there for your self-interest, for protecting your own rights or like for your own offenses, how is that different from, Trump supporters or people who are just fighting for their own, what they think is their own rights, right? Like what makes you different should be that you need to care and embrace other people's issues and concerns instead of just your own. Otherwise, you're the same as those deplorables that you're protesting against.
Exactly.
Sorry. Not sorry.
The reason why we want to talk about this after the Women's March is recognizing that you can't just march and be happy with it, right? We need to have these hard conversations. They're going to be hard. They're going to be uncomfortable. But that's part of becoming woke. For every feminist with a particular focus, you're also an ally in another focus.
Yeah, and then
every feminist is an ally in that sense.
Yeah, and learning how and where to step up. Thank you so much for listening to us this week. We hope you kind of took away something from it. As always, music credits to Jazz Art, Ryan Little, and Broke for Free.
And if you haven't followed us on YouTube, our latest channel, you should definitely follow us.
We're also still going to be on SoundCloud, but we want to highlight YouTube a bit more.
And also, it's a lot easier, I guess, to listen on YouTube than, say, like open up SoundCloud or, go into iTunes and download the podcast. So we're trying to make it easier for you guys to listen, to enjoy the episodes.
Yeah. And once again, we always really want feedback. So email us at dialogikapodcast@gmail.com or send us a Facebook message or comment on YouTube.
And as always, we'll have resources and links at our website, dialogika.id. And
thanks so much.